So my aim in today's webinar is to help us understand some of the challenges we face in 2020 and actually beyond as a result of two things. Firstly, the changes which are happening anyway in learning and development, and we'll look at that through the lens of the Global Sentiment Survey. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a look at COVID-19, the impact that's having on what we do, and how we can change what we do in order to avert disaster and also get some good results out of it. There's opportunity as well as risk here. So the Global Sentiment Survey part of this is the survey that I run every year, and that's going to take up the majority of the presentation. Learning Pool is one of the 5 sponsors I have for the survey this year. Delighted to have them. It's only through our partners that it's possible to get the Global Sentiment Survey out there. And this year, in the end, we had actually 2,500 people responding to it, which is a great result. So what I want to take you through today is 5 things. Firstly, looking at the results for 2020. What did the survey say? There's one key thing from that, which is data, but then we go beyond that and have a look at what does people talking about data really mean. And actually, Mark, in his role as CTO at Learning Pool, has got a lot to share on that. I think if we dig into the data a bit further, we can see that there's actually a shift away from content as our focus. And I just want to have a quick look at that in point 2. In the 5 fates, which is a rather grand point, number 3, I'll be having a look at 2 groups that respond to the survey. Group A, which is enthusiastic, and Group B, which is a bit more pragmatic. What do their 2 different responses to the survey tell us about the future of learning and development? Not everything that people are enthusiastic about actually gets adopted. We'll have a look at that in point 3. In 4, we're going to have a look at the global side of things. What's different about the future for learning and development? For me, one of the big things is I think we have less influence from North America than we've had in the past. That may change, but I'd like to look at that in 4. And then 5, I want to wrap up and conclude, but also have a look at what we can do about COVID-19. Alistair, hello. Welcome to have you here, and thank you for making it despite your variable issues with IT. All right, let me push on with the webinar and give you some of these results from 2020. By the way, throughout this, I've used the theme of the classical world. This is Marcus Aurelius, I believe, on an equestrian statue outside a museum in Rome. I just went out and I pulled off all these photographs of Rome, Italy, Sicily, Greece, to try to use as a backdrop. A simple reason, 2020 in Roman numerals is MMXX. It just caught my fancy. There's nothing more significant than that. Every year I run a survey, and the survey asks one question, just one question: what will be hot in workplace learning and development in 2020? This is the 7th year that the survey is run, and people choose from 3 options from 15. Now, the data I've got in this survey looks at the initial published survey of 2,278 voters, and they came from 86 countries. Those are all the flags of all the countries. Actually, subsequently, we had more votes coming from Ireland and a separate survey run in Sweden. I'm putting those together into a report I'll publish in a couple of months' time. That brings the total number of votes for this up to 2,500. Actually, as it happens, they were very consistent. There was no major change in those extra votes. Now, look, if you ask people what will be hot next year, really, the answer could be anything. But when you've got 2,500 people responding and you've got 7 years of data, you can start seeing some trends. And that's interesting. But before we jump into the trends, I want to raise one important caveat and point about the survey. The important caveat is that it's a non-representative sample. You'll be familiar with this curve, which is the diffusion of innovation curve from Everett Rogers, and it shows how new ideas spread. The people who respond to this survey are not equally scattered across this curve. Firstly, we ask people through social media and through email to respond. So the people who respond are a limited subset of the total population of L&D people. They're people who have social media and who have email. Secondly, they choose to respond. So they're self-selecting. Now, this means that there are almost certainly people who are enthusiastic, excited about change, and who like technology. They're almost certainly on the left-hand side of the curve here. Now, if the point is to get a clear view about where everybody is in learning and development at the moment, that's not good enough. But actually, the point about doing this pulse check, what do you think is hot, is to get an idea about exactly what these people, the innovators and the early adopters, think. Why? Because what the early majority and the late majority adopt matters, and it's drawn on what these people think is important. Not everything that the people on the left-hand side of the graph think is important or hot will be adopted later on. But everything that is adopted later, at one point, was thought interesting and hot by the innovators and early adopters. And much of what I do is to look at the results of the survey and try to get a good guess about which of those ideas will take off, which of them won't. And that's where we'll spend part 3 of the survey, of the presentation today. All right, so here's the survey. I've got just had a cup of tea brought into me very kindly. I'm going to take a sip of the tea. These are the 15 options plus one more, the other option that I gave people this year. If I was to ask you what you think is going to be hot this year from this, you can just choose one of those and type it in the chat window. Or if you prefer, just write something else. After all, you could choose other. So what do you think is going to be hot this year? Please answer in the chat window while I have a sip of this cup of tea. What I love about L&D people, and I do this everywhere in the world. I do a lot of traveling. Well, I did before the shutdown, and a lot of speaking. Whenever I ask for an opinion, bang, out the blocks, everyone's got an opinion to share, and it's fantastic. I've been doing webinars for something like 13 years, hosting, delivering, and so on, and I have never done one without learning from the audience. And I love the fact that everyone's pitching in with their ideas, so please keep sharing. All right. Interesting. So a lot of different views here, as you would expect, and it's quite understandable. Everyone has different views. I can see, scanning it, that curation is quite hot. So Liz Keeley say curation. We've got virtual training which isn't on the list, from Roel. But also, if virtual training also means webinars, then Skip said that. Please keep your answers coming, by the way. Mobile delivery, getting quite a strong response. Patricia coming in there with mobile. And Micro from Hazel. Neuroscience, Cognitive Science, says Patricia. So pretty much almost every option there represented. And by the way, when I say curation, because we have an audience that isn't entirely English speaking, I always forget that curation is a word that's not familiar necessarily to non-native speakers. Curation means the collection together of ideas, and they're often the adding of some insight, just as somebody running a museum would pull together artifacts and show them. Okay, so that's what we mean by curation. A really wide range there, and as I say, not everything even on the list. So Ian Stobie says, scaling expertise. I like it. All right, here are the answers that I got from my 2,200 people from this survey. And there's no right or wrong. So if you chose video, which is number 15, that's fine. And video may be exactly what's right for your organization. That's it shown on a table, and actually that table is designed really to be seen in a large auditorium, but very often when I'm doing a webinar, I prefer to look at the table like this. And usually or in the past when I've looked at these results, I will say, now there are 3 things we can look at from here, but actually looking at these results, there is one thing which I take away from this, which is that data dominates the top 5 results here. If you look at the answers here, learning analytics relies on data, artificial intelligence does. Learning experience platforms to do what they say they want to do in terms of personalization and so on relies on data. Personalization totally relies on data. Now, collaborative and social learning doesn't rely on data, but actually, if you have the data, you can do an awful lot with it. So really, data underlies everything else on the top 5. And that's pretty exciting for me. But I think also we need to be cautious about what this means. But before I go into what I think we should be cautious about here, I'd just like to get Mark to come in. Mark, we chatted about this last week, and one thing that Learning Pool does very well is use data. Obviously, Learning Pool has a learning experience platform, but you use it in a wide range of things. So what are your reflections on this idea that everyone is talking about data for 2020?
Yeah, so I'm just to pick up on your point about collaborative social learning first. I think is how can you use data there? So we ran this really interesting project with AstraZeneca where they had a whole bunch of engagement, and they had hundreds of comments, hundreds and thousands of comments on their comment streams about all of the learning people were undertaking. But it's great. So you have a checkbox of this course had 2,000 comments, this course had 1,000 comments, and it sort of shows engagement, but it doesn't really show if people are learning anything from that. So we had the challenge to take that, and we ran it through a semantic analysis engine to figure out whether the comments were showing that a level of engagement that was good. You know, people were just giving the video a thumbs up, or that's great, that's wonderful, or if people are actually engaging with, that's a really useful, insightful video, I can take something from that and learn in the workplace. So you can use commenting as data, you know, whether it's a positive comment or a negative comment, or it shows where somebody is engaged or not. So, you know, in general, data is dominating what we're trying to achieve, and what we're trying to achieve is show that the learning is reflected in performance. And to get that, you would need more than one data source. You have all of your learning data, but then you would need another source, which is either your KPIs or something to reflect that their learning is influencing some positive behaviors or a change in someone's work practices that is going to benefit the business. But you know, that is where we're trying to get to with gathering all of the data. And you know, the real factor is here is, you know, what is the question that you're trying to solve. It's also interesting when you started this slide deck today, your question was simply, what will be hot in 2020? So you know, you had a question that you wanted to answer, and then you were starting to get the right data to answer that question. So you sent out a survey and you gathered your data. And then now this is the third piece, which is you need to understand what that data means. You know, so it's a step process. And you know, if you have all these feedback loops built in, to keep making sure that you're gathering the right data to answer the question that you set out to answer to begin with, and then understanding what that is, that's where you'll get some insightful data to back up or to answer that question for you. So it's just a good segue. The start of your slide deck was, you know, what we're trying to achieve.
I think thank you. I think and you know, it's a deceptively simple question. What do you think is hot? And people can answer it, and it's designed to be answered very quickly. But what we get out of it is quite a lot of information. I mean, we have the IP address of where people are in the world, but there are other things we can learn from it as well. So for me, it's being able to get hold of the data. But coming back to your point, I just have one data source, which is the responses to that over a period of 7 years. Your point about collecting data from more than one place, and in particular, not just from learning systems, but to be able to correlate the data with other data from other systems, I think is pretty crucial. I'm not convinced that everyone responding to this survey is thinking, when I'm talking about learning analytics, I'm thinking about learning the analytics from my platform and other things, and combining that with data from other sources. I think for a lot of people that's not something they think about, but you actually do this. You're talking with customers all the time, Mark. Do your customers think about data that way, or do they just think about learning data?
Well, so you get, I suppose you get a few different types of customers, and where are they on the maturity level of how they're analyzing their data. So lots of customers will come to us and say, you know, show me your dashboards. I need to see all of the dashboards, all of the course completions that we have, and who is doing what, and what is my engagement metric in my LMS, which is all great data, you know, and you need that engagement to keep people involved and you know, to keep gathering the data. But we ran a really interesting project with Bill Roy and Bach, and those had a real question to answer, which was, what is the effect that learning is having on my KPIs, my in-store KPIs?
Right.
So this was a retail customer. And what they were trying to measure, and they did a real smart thing where they did a few A/B tests. So they ran some testing on their stores.
Not everybody might know, Mark. Not everybody might know what an A/B test is. So you might just want to quickly explain that.
Yeah. So an A/B test is you do something one way, and then you try it another way, and then you can compare the results. So you compare the results of A versus the results of B, and generally one should be better than the other. If they're both exactly the same, maybe you need to, you know, swap out another B or another A, and then you can figure out which is the best between those. So they ran actually an ABC test, I guess, where they trained their staff using a standard classroom. They trained their staff using online, and they trained their staff using mixed, which was online and I guess, standard classroom. So just
When was this, Mark? When was this?
this is a number of years ago. That was, I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago that this
Uh-huh.
test was executed. Yeah, and it's I think it's a white paper that we have available on our site. So they'll run back then, grabbed all of that learning data, and they also fed in their in-store KPIs, so number of sales that they were making, and they were trying to relate the people that had taken and understood the learning with increased sales, or the increased store KPIs, customer satisfaction, or whatever it is that they were trying to correlate with.
Yeah.
So these are the two data sources that they had, and they found from all of the testing that the mixed approach was the best, and the stores that scored the best in the mixed approach had better results on KPI. So they fed in all of this data and analyzed it.
Okay, I didn't know you had that. I mean, I think that's a gold dust study. If there's anybody from Learning Pool on the line in the room, please can you go and find the URL and drop it in the chat, because I think that's just that's this excellent data and an excellent story to share. And it does tell us what I hope we know, which is that a blended approach probably is the best one. Oh, there you go. Sam's dropped in Villa and Bosch into the chat. Thank you very much, Sam. My experience is that generally people are not prepared to go through the pain of going through one of those studies. It's just a bit too much work. And I find that intensely frustrating, because if they do it, they learn an awful lot from it. And look, shout out to Olga, says, look, that's a good point. Integration with other systems is surely crucial, whether it's between LMS and a CRM or Teams and so on. Perhaps later on, Mark, we can come back to Teams and other social tools for what we can use from that in terms of integrating. Because you mentioned collaborative and social learning. I'm noticing it's 20 past. I kind of want to keep cracking on with the pace of this. I'm going to come back to that later on. But Mark, please interrupt me in the course of my rambling if you think, hey, Don's not mentioned this and this is an important point. So look, what my view is, and you've heard a quite sophisticated view there from Mark as well about data and how some clients are totally focused on it and others are a bit regarding it superficially. Just show me your dashboard. My view is that this business about people talking about data has to be given with a pinch of salt. Sam, please drop your contact details into the chat if you want to know more about this. This has to be interpreted, and the point about what Mark is saying is data is fine, but you need to add insight, you need to interpret it. And you mentioned these loops, Mark, right? Again and again, you ask the question, you query the data, you get an idea out of it in the form of the answer, but that's never the final answer. It always makes you think, yes, but what about ... and you cycle back. Looking at this, my initial answer is, what's the top five? The top five of these things. All right, but what does that really mean? I think we have to be really careful about this. Because people talk about learning analytics, it doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. If they do know what they're talking about with learning analytics or anything else, it doesn't mean they actually know how to use data properly. They might know they can define it, but they can't do it. And if they can define it and they can do it, it doesn't mean that this year, miraculously in 2020, everybody else is going to learn what it means and how to do it. But what I do think tells us about this, and what I do think these 5 things tell us, is that they are an aspiration, they're an idea. What's not here is anything to do with content. There's nothing here about micro-learning or video or curation or performance support tools or virtual reality. These are all elsewhere on the list. This is all about trying to get a grip on what we're doing, and in particular, it's a focus away from content. So I think, for me, what's important about this is what's not shown. And it tells us that there's a shift away from what we've always done, deliver content, towards something else. I want to look at that now, this shift away from content. When I started, this is I think a temple in Sicily in the background, Greek temple. When I started doing training as an English language teacher in 1987, it was very clear, everything else was very clear. All you were concerned about as you went into the classroom was, what should I deliver? I've got an intermediate class, they need to know the present perfect, right? How do I deliver that to them? What should I deliver? I think now the shift in L&D is towards answering 2 other questions which are important. The first one is this question of how. How can I be effective? And I think that's being answered by the data question. If you think about the what as being, you want to create something. In this case, let's say you create a car, great, then you've got something. The how is, how can I drive it faster? And how can I get to my destination faster? Skip is bringing in Karl Popper, the Hungarian philosopher, and his notes on falsification. If you want to say more about that, Skip, please go ahead. There's a third question here, though. I'm not saying we stop doing delivery. I think that's a false dichotomy. We still have to give people content. In addition, though, of course, there are self-service ways of learning and other things we need to be thinking about. So I think the what is, we need to create things. We probably need to make things available as well, though. The how is, how do I make that effective? How do I drive fast in the car? There is a third question. We'll come to that in a minute. What I want to look at now is this idea of what I call the 5 fates. It's slightly melodramatic. I couldn't resist the alliteration, given the classical theme I've chosen for this year. So the 5 fates are stars, staples, wallflowers, aspirations, perennials. What does that mean? Well, if you look at that list of 15 things, then you've got something which... Ian's dropped in Black Swan into the chat. That a black swan is the case of if you can show something is, correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, you can show that something is, you can draw an inference from the empirical view of the world. If you're in the UK, you would say all swans are white. But then if you travel to Australia, you only need one counterexample to disprove that. And if you go to Australia, guess what? You find a black swan, and that disproves your generalized view that all swans are white. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, Ian. Back to the 5 fates. Here we've got my attempt to create patterns, or rather to describe in terms of patterns the way that the options I give people to choose from go up and down the table over the years. It might seem random. It might seem that you could explain one in one terms and another in different terms, but actually they can all be explained, I think, in terms of these 5 different buckets. I'm not going to look at all of them, but I want to look at a couple of them because I think that they will help us understand more about this and understand what's coming in the future. The stars are the options that everybody wants. So this year, learning analytics is a star. Staples are the bread and butter, the potatoes. Everybody uses them. Wallflowers, only a few people want them. Aspirations might become stars in the future, but perennials come back year after year. Let me explain what I mean in more detail with an example. So look, here's the last 5 years of the survey. I could go back 7 years, but then it becomes illegible. So 5 it is. The stars this year are learning analytics, learning experience platforms, and artificial intelligence. Actually, artificial intelligence is on its way down, but it's had such a great rise in the past, I've included it in stars for the moment. Now, these are the options everyone wants to talk about, and you can look at 1 year, like the panel, the table on the right-hand side, and you can look at the previous years, and you can say, well, we can't get much more from the data. But actually, it turns out you can. I'm going to take you on a diversion now to look at those 2 groups who vote on the survey, and then I'm going to come back and try to explore what that tells us about the possible future. So, it turns out that when people vote on this, one of the great predictors of how they're going to vote is not where they are in the world, although that helps. It's when they vote. It might be weird, but stay with me. Here's the pattern of voting over time. You'll see that there are 2 clumps of votes. Partly that's because in the middle we have Christmas and New Year. But actually it's also because the initial bit of voting is done in one way and the second bit a different way. So we have Group A and Group B here. And sorry about the alignment there of the text. That's because I imported this into Adobe and it's made an image of it which hasn't quite fitted what I wanted it to be. Group A is contacted purely by social media. Group B is contacted only by email. Now, there are other people who are responding in that second group who are responding via social media because that continues. But the first part of the campaign to get people to vote only happens via social media. So I know that the people on the left-hand side are only there through being approached through social media. In the Group B, I'm just looking at the people who are there by email. And they vote very differently. Group A is keen on innovation. They like methodologies and they like social media. On the right-hand side, Group B is far keener on the familiar, things that have been on the table for a while. They like technology rather than methodology, and we know they're on email because that's how they respond to the survey. We know those first 3 bullet points. It's slightly speculation on my part, but I think I can back it up, that Group A are enthusiasts and Group B are pragmatists. And going further into speculation, but again, I think I can back it up, Group A, I would say, are opinion leaders. They're the people who churn through ideas quite quickly, whereas Group B are the decision makers. In my mind, and from how I see them behaving, Group A tend to be people who are forming ideas, discussing them quickly, discarding old ideas and moving on to new ones. Group B look at the various options that are open to them to implement good learning and development practice in their workplace, and they choose from the ideas of Group A. Not all of them, but some of them. All right. So, going back to our curve, this is how it looks. Group A, I think, are mostly innovators, and Group B, mostly early adopters. Now, this is a well-defined taxonomy, so I'm not going to say they are exactly one-to-one, but I think there's a strong case for saying there's a correlation between what Group A are thinking, what's new, what can I get excited about, and Group B thinking, what can I adopt in the workplace that will help me do my job? What questions about my work will it answer? Let's look at how they voted. Let's go back to those tables, and let's see how they voted for 2 of our stars. So, Learning Analytics, you can see, was top on both tables for Group A, and Group B both thought that Learning Analytics was number 1, but the numbers in square brackets are how people voted the previous year. So look, Learning Analytics was number 1 last year for Group A and number 1 this year. For Group B, it was number 3 this year, and now it's number 1 this year. In other words, for the leading option here, Group B followed Group A's lead. The same is also true for that one vote that's going down the table. Artificial intelligence, going down from 5 to 6 this year for Group A. Group B had it at 2 last year, and it drops to number 5. So you can see here that Group B is lagging Group A by about a year, and typically that's how the answers go. They're 12 to 18 months, sometimes longer, behind Group A. That's what it looks like for the stars. Let's look at one of the other options we've got here, which is what I call the staples. Mobile delivery and video are 2 options which people use all the time. We know that looking around at how people do their training, we know that mobile delivery and video are really common delivery mechanisms. And I call these the staples because, unlike the sexy, attractive world of learning analytics, these things have been around for a while and they've become part of business as usual. You'll notice that with the voting between Group A and Group B is very different here. Mobile delivery is just not interesting for Group A at all. It is at the bottom of the table for them. They really don't care about it. But for Group B, it's at 8. Why? Because mobile delivery delivers an answer to a question that Group B has got. If they are, as I speculate, the people who are implementing learning technologies and making things happen in the workplace, mobile delivery solves a real problem, and so too does video. They're less enthusiastic about video, and I speculate that this is because video has some issues around it, but it's simple enough to do, whereas mobile delivery is much more complex, but also offers much more in terms of being able to help virtually every form of content get delivered. So what I'm trying to show here is that looking behind the front of the data, we're looking to Group A and Group B, we can see that I think Group A is leading here, and it's becoming less interested in these 2 options, that Group B is still showing enthusiasm for them. For me, this proves that mobile delivery and video are, and we know this from our experience looking at things, are going to be widely adopted. But I suspect the people on this call are probably quite advanced in their use of learning technologies. Not everybody's using mobile delivery. Not everybody's using video. And when I show this to people, I did this in Paris in February, I launched the results. And somebody looked at the table and said, but look, video's at the bottom. Does that mean I shouldn't use it? I say, on the contrary, what it shows is that it's actually one of those options which is going to be widely spread, and you're absolutely safe to adopt it. Now, in contrast, look at the Wallflowers of curation. Now, Mark, I'd like to have a conversation about curation in a second, because I find this result very annoying, and I'd like to know if you feel the same way. Curation and neuroscience, they follow the same sort of pattern as the previous 2 options, but I call these Wallflowers because I know, looking at how people are using stuff in the workplace, they're not using neuroscience. Sadly, they're not using curation. sadly. And if you look at Group A and Group B, you can see that Group A are enthusiastic about curation, Group B not enthusiastic about curation. And although it's not shown there for neuroscience, which is on 13 for both, I know from the numbers that neuroscience is going up with Group A and it's going down with Group B. So the Wallflower options are the options that Group A brings to the dance. They're keen on them, they're enthusiastic, but Group B doesn't want to dance. And I think if you look at that in contrast to mobile delivery and video, is that those options are not answering a question that Group B has in their minds. They're not helping them do something to do with their daily work. Now, Olga asks, what if you asked about AI curation? It's a fair question, Olga. I don't change the wording year on year because I need continuity. If I had changed it, you may be absolutely right. There could be something I'm missing there, and they would have been enthusiastic about it. And very often people will select something that is a sexy new term like AI, even if it leads to an end like curation that they're not particularly concerned about. So it's a really fair point, Olga. Mark, looking at this, I despair that curation, which I think is tremendously useful, is not higher. But of course, at Learning Pool, you do a fair amount of curation for people, I believe. And what's your view about this? And what do your customers say? Are your customers enthusiastic about curation?
Yeah, so we have curation as a service. So if you have a specific topic that you want a bunch of resources created across the web, we can provide the service and we can create a bunch of those item of information and put them into your learning experience platform. Now the problem is getting good quality curated content out there, and figuring out what is open and what you can and cannot share, and making sure that you have the correct licenses for it. And it's to tip back to one of the points here where people are asking about integration with other systems.
Yeah.
We can integrate and curate a bunch of content from other providers and other vendors that have off-the-shelf catalogs. We can hook into from our learning experience platform into our LMS or any other LMS and curate content from those as well. But then the real difficult part is putting the correct content for the people into their stream. So that comes back to almost like an AI, so that you're getting like a Netflix approach where you have watched a series or learned a series of topics, and then the curated content then is tagged with those same tags, and then those end up in your stream. So you're getting the correct content that you're interested in or that your peers have recommended, or whatever the recommendation engine is, that you're getting that content there. So maybe is AI creation the next thing, where it's going off and getting you this content from the web, or that somebody has manually created and then it is recommending it to you. But there's definitely an interest in curation and creation of content.
And I think you're echoing Olga's point here, which is that look, people might not be concerned about curation, but if you either stuck a sexy term on it like AI, or if you made it clear that it's the answer to a problem, so let's say you didn't ask for curation, but you said relevant content placed into people's work streams or where they hang out, maybe, I don't know, Slack or Teams, if you expressed it that way, people might well say, yeah, I absolutely want to have that. And I think that this is one of the issues around buzz terms, is always that it's helping people understand the applicability of it to their particular situation. I'll come on to look at that very shortly. I just want to give a shout out to Sam. Sam says, important part of curation is the quality and context to get to the objective you want to achieve, which is very well expressing what I'm trying to say, which is that just having a bunch of stuff in a box is not curation. Having the right stuff there and the context of why that's important to you is what makes curation worthwhile. So thank you for raising that.
You could have a bunch of streams of curation, and they're pushing in a whole load of content. And it's a really simple topic like fire safety. Like the fire safety, content for your organization should be the one that you have generated or created, rather than a generic fire safety that you will never be able to find the fire exit because they're blue instead of green in your organization. So that's part of what Sam's getting at there.
It's a good point. The worst that you could do is dilute the really good content you've got with a bunch of stuff that can be found quite easily and adds absolutely no value at all. it is curation, but it's curation of the worst sort. I'm not sure I would even call it curation. It's just throwing things in a box, isn't it? So this point about moving from Group A to Group B, and I was saying earlier, that's one of the main things I'm looking at here is how do things get adopted? How do things jump from A to B? I did some research over the summer, and I found that three things happen. Firstly, popularity and social proof is the first stage. If people aren't talking about it, it doesn't have a chance of taking off. The second thing is people need to see case studies. How does this work for me? How does this work in general? Are people doing it? And then finally, is it applicable in my context? So if people talk about curation, that's a very vague idea. But if you can show somebody using curation in a similar sized organization or a similar sector, it's much more likely to make the shift from Group A to Group B. And it might be, I think, as people have alluded to, that if you don't do it, if you don't show it happening in somebody's context, it won't take off, but it might be happening under another name. I'm going to press on because I want to get through to the COVID-19 stuff towards the end here. The perennials, the things that are apparent every year, you could see here that it looked to me as if consulting and showing value were on their way down. Normally it's been in the middle of the table, but last year they dipped, and I would have expected them to have almost started shuffling off the table, but in fact they jumped back up this year. And this is something else I want to draw your attention to from the data because it shows me something crucial about how I think people or some people are thinking about really working with the business right now. Group A are all over this. They put consulting with the business at number 3, it was at number 6 last year. Showing value at number 5 was at 8 last year. Now, Group B are less enthusiastic. They put showing value at number 10 and now actually got consulting going down from 9 to 12. This is appalling to me because for me, consulting and showing value are probably the most important things that learning and development can do. The issue is that they do not answer questions that Group B have got in their mind, which primarily are around delivery. How do I get this stuff done? Now, I'm hoping that this year, and we've had people alluding to this already, I think we've had people saying, look, what will the answers to this survey be like after COVID-19? We'll discover next year, and I'm going to do some research actually in the next couple of months about how we are responding to this crunch point at the moment. But for me, showing value and consulting with the business enables us to answer this third question. With what we've built ourselves something, with how we're delivering it effectively. But the third question, which we have to answer, is why should the business care? The why. We only answer that by consulting with the business and then going back to say, by the way, you know that stuff that we said we were going to do? We're going to show you the value of what we did. Some people are doing this really well. And Louise makes a really good point. If you consult, it's vital. You get buy-in and sponsorship. Counter side of that, Louise, of course, is if you don't consult, you don't have that relationship with the senior business, there's every chance you're seen as being expendable. I'm not going to go into this case study from Guy Wilmshurst-Smith. What I will do is drop into the, I'll make sure that when Learning Pool follow up with email, you get a link to Guy's YouTube video from Learning Technologies this year, talking about how he's been delivering training using data to show value and the immense impact it's had. And he's doing exactly what Louise is talking about here, not just getting buy-in, but he's now seen as being a strategic player in the organization. Remember that phrase, a strategic player, having data conversations. That's what Guy is doing at Network Rail. We'll come back to that at the end. Very quickly, using 3 options, I want to just illustrate that we have moved, I think, from a world where we are dominated by North America to a different sort of world. And by the way, the slides here and the chat and the recording will all be available. Learning Pool will come out to you with a link for that at the end of this. Here's a slide from the 2017 survey, but this looks at the results from 2016 when people were voting for micro-learning. You can see that the share of the vote for micro-learning was very, very much dominated by North America. The following year, North America contributed half that amount, but everybody else in the world was voting enthusiastically for micro-learning. What had happened here was that, for various reasons, microlearning took off, or at least talk about microlearning took off in the States in 2016, and that influenced the rest of the world the following year. The phrase is, America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, and that's absolutely what happened with microlearning. We followed the US. But look at learning analytics, the number one option this year. That's very different. We don't see North America being ahead of the rest of the world and then the rest of the world following it. In fact, it was down and then it followed with an increase this year. It's much more a homogeneous line there. People are sort of all enthusiastic, more or less to the same level about learning analytics. And if you look at personalization, you can see that it dropped, the vote for personalization dropped substantially in North America and India this year. By the way, personalization was number one for the last 2 years and number two for the 2 years before that. But it dropped actually more in UK and Europe before that. So it's almost as if UK and Europe dropped first and then North America and India followed. I don't believe that's what's happening, by the way. I think what's happening here is that they're not following our lead. It's just that the world is now in a place where we're having closer conversations together about all of these things, very often driven by social media, in a way that makes it a faster communicated, much more homogeneous view of what's important in our field. So a number of conclusions there, but that last one was, and I'll wrap up at the end, the last conclusion there was we're no longer as dominated by North America as we were. That may change, who knows? I'm not saying this is in the written in stone, but I found that quite fascinating, I think quite positive. Here are some thoughts from what I've been talking to people about COVID-19 and how we should respond to it with learning and development. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, please take away this point here. And I'm going to show you a table in a minute, which I hope you'll also take away. My key takeaway is the first 2 points here. I've been talking to a lot of people over the last month who are trying to recreate the classroom online because that's all they've ever done, and they've got classes booked in, and they need to do it now online rather than face-to-face. It is hellishly difficult, and people will have a substandard experience, almost certainly, if you try to recreate the classroom online. The second point is always keep the long term in mind, and just keep that phrase there in your head. I'll explain what I mean in the next couple of slides. So when you're not trying to recreate the classroom, you're going to have to, as an alternative, blend synchronous and asynchronous stuff, and then as you move forward, and this will become clear as I talk about this pattern of behavior I'm going to suggest, as you move from what I'd call right now the emergency phase through to the midterm where you're adapting stuff and adopting stuff, then I think you need to be able to not only try out a lot of stuff now, but abandon it in the midterm so that you can create an environment for supporting the learning in the future. Let me just explain what I mean. And by the way, I'm absolutely open to questions and confrontation on this. You may say to me, I don't agree with this, Don, and it is such an important topic. I really am keen to hear what you have to say on this. So firstly, I'd say we're in 3 phases of change at the moment. The short term is pretty much an emergency. We've just got to get stuff done. So when I talk about near business as usual here, we're trying to do old things. You've got to get a classroom in new ways. You're doing it online. At some point in the future, there will be a new way of working. And I think for me, that new way of working will be very different to how we work now, because it would be based not on an analogy first. In other words, let's do a classroom, but a digital first approach. In fact, I think the future will be digital by default. Digital by default, not meaning that everything is done online, but that the first response you go to is a digital one. Why shouldn't we do it this way? And the reason I believe that's going to happen is we're going to have 6 months or so of people largely working from home, and we're going to do that across the developed world. The only analogy we've had to that sort of communal experience of massive change is the World War. We know that over a period of time, when people have to do things in a new way, new habits develop. And I think the new habit we're going to develop is the view that we can do this online, and why wouldn't we? It's going to be a massive shake-up. There's a new way of working there, not just of learning, a new way of working, which we need to support. And we can do it. But unfortunately, we need not to get caught up in the short-term model of just trying to get stuff done, which is why we've got to keep the long-term in mind. And that means that we've got to do this stuff in the short term and get towards a transition point as quickly as possible where we can then support the long term. So our focus in the short term is, emergency. Let's just get this stuff out the door. But then as soon as we can, we need to start building for the future, and then we start supporting the new normal. So there's different ideas there. Here, we're just working at pace. Here, we are building, and here we are supporting the new normal in a different way. Because I would hope that by the time we get to the new normal, we are able to be strategic with the organization, having those data conversations that I was talking about. Mark, were you about to come in there, or were you just clearing your throat?
No, yeah. So we're seeing this as well. So, in the short term, and what we're seeing now is people are trying to replicate the old ways of working online,
Yeah,
using online tools. So, everybody's getting absolutely hammered with Zoom meetings, and they're trying to run classrooms in a virtual way, and it's a full day of classroom training, and it's just absolutely exhausting people. So, short term, yeah, that's an absolute fix. But to the long term, we need to start getting to asynchronous models where people can use all of the resources that are available to them and digest and leave feedback and comments. And then you could potentially use a synchronous method where people get together very quickly online to discuss whatever is happening. And I
right.
think we can't lose out on that piece where this sort of group learning is super important, and leaving comments and getting engagement. And we sort of can't get away from that. But definitely in the short term, we are seeing emergency solutions emerging with online and Zoom, and hopefully we can get over to the right where the new
Well,
normal.
hopefully we can. And I think, unfortunately, we're asking a lot of people here, because we're asking you to deliver the emergency solutions at the same time of bearing in mind all this other stuff you have to do. And that's a big ask. And it's also a shift in our mindset, because the classroom model that I started with when I was delivering English language training in 1987 as a classroom trainer, you don't need that. As you were saying, asynchronous, peer-supported, self-service stuff can deliver a tremendous amount, without us having to be involved synchronously. There's so much there, but it does demand a shift in our perception of what learning is about. Joe Cook coming in there. Joe does an awful lot of stuff with online training and delivery and helping people do that. Great story there. Please, if you've got stories about what you're coping with at the moment, please feel free to share them in chat. And if you've got an issue, anybody got an idea about how I can deal with this, stick the question in chat, because we've got a group of 70 people here who are all experts in this field. I feel sure that somebody's going to help you if you put the question here. There's risk in all this, by the way. The risk is that we repeat bad practice. By the way, there's lots of bad practice in the classroom. You don't want to repeat that when you take it online. And we might invent bad practice. That happened in 2001 when the towers came down. What we found was that airlines shut down, people didn't travel, everything moved online in the form of a PowerPoint deck with a click next button. That's really bad practice, and it gave e-learning a bad reputation that's lasted about 1.5 decades. In the future, there is a really, really serious risk, which is that this is an opportunity for us. However mad it seems, this is a huge opportunity for us. And if we play safe and just try to deal with tactical delivery, we won't take the opportunity. But if we try to go strategic, have the conversations with people that we need to, then we're going to have the opportunity to go strategic. In the midterm, this business of adopting new approaches in the midterm, I just want to share with you something that I developed for my book, Learning Technologies in the Workplace. I talked to an awful lot, like 100 people who'd done good learning technology implementations, and of all the people I talked to, this quote from Andy Wooler stood out. You can do anything with technology, but people can stop you doing just about everything. And the reason I mention this is that in the midterm, as we try to build towards practices which support us in the long term, we're reliant on adopting new technologies. Not just technology, because we need new practices and skills, and I'll talk about 3 skills we want in a minute, but we absolutely need new technologies as well. And my observation of people adopting new technologies is that if they do it successfully, they go through these 6 steps. And this is what happens at each stage. But the problem is, when people don't do it successfully, they start here. This happens all the time. People buy a learning management system, they put it in, and they expect it to work without having gone through a proper planning phase, and most importantly, without having gone through the understanding phase, the consultative conversations, which enable us to understand what problem are we trying to solve. If you don't do that, then by the time you get to the assessment phase, you're saying, why is nobody coming to my learning management system? And the reason is not that you're not doing enough marketing. The reason is that you're not solving a problem that people had. I want to move on and wrap up shortly, but I just want to get Mark's take on this. I know you're the CTO, but surely when you're implementing something with a client, Mark, you don't start here, do you? You start with, please tell me you understand with the understanding. You begin with the understanding phase.
Yeah, so it gets back to, what does success look like for you? What does success be? And, we have to write that down and measure ourselves against that. So when, we're months down the line and we've implemented the system and it's gone live, what does success look like? And did this deliver business value for your business? Because that's really what it's all about here. It's delivering tangible business value so that all of the work that we have done and all of the money that has been spent to get the system live, is it delivering? Is it delivering value? And that has to be the number one criteria.
Great question from Louise Ferris. Thank you. You're right. Louise Ferris has asked, look, you talk, Donald, about not recreating the classroom. You're right, but what are the alternatives? And what are longer-term solutions people are striving for? Hazel's also saying, look, I fear some people will feel left behind if we adopt too much technology. I want to quickly just push through this and then spend 5 minutes answering those questions. So I just want to leave you with this bit here, that my reminder as I wrap up on that whole slide there is the bottom right-hand corner. Don't play safe. There's an advantage of going tactical, of going strategic. By the way, if you stay tactical, there's every risk that we end up simply being what I call in the learning ghetto, being caught in the training ghetto where we do the tactical stuff and somebody else does the strategic stuff. Long term, I'd like to suggest that you explore 3 types of skills which we currently don't do much of in learning development. And we're going to come back to Patricia, Louise and Hazel's point. Digital by default is our future because I think that's what people are going to get used to doing over the next few months. In order to really be able to solve business problems, I think we need to have we need to have performance consulting conversations with people at the top of the organization so that we can understand the issues we're trying to solve. Work task analysis enables us to look at work and tasks that people are doing and split it up into the actual actions people take and then say, for each of these things, what can we do about it with training or learning or performance support, and actually what else can be supported in other ways? And of those, which requires a training solution and which requires something else? Data conversations enable us to say, I've looked at the data from the learning stuff we're doing, I've looked at the data from the business, I've correlated the two, and I can tell you that when we do more of this, we get this. And when we say we get this, we need to be talking about it in terms of the business. So for Guy Wilmshurst-Smith at Network Rail, it was, I can tell you if you train your people on this, you'll have fewer delays on the line, which is the language of everybody at Network Rail. So the data conversations, rather than learning conversations, enable us to establish ourselves as strategists. Quick wrap up. Everyone's going to be talking about data this year. It doesn't mean they know what they're talking about. There may be a shift to real consulting with the business, provided that Group B can be persuaded by Group A that it applies to their workplace and solves the problem they've got. The number one we have on the table this year is learning analytics, and unlike in previous years, that's not driven, as it was with microlearning and also with personalization. It's not driven from North America. We seem to have a much more homogeneous way of thinking about things. I'm going to go to the final slide so you can look at that rubbish formatting by me. If you go to that URL, you can download the report for free, but also that URL will come out to you in the email from Learning Pool. I want to come back now to this question from Louise. You talk about not recreating the classroom, but what are the alternatives? Actually, Olga's got a really good answer here. A good starting point is understanding where the value is in the classroom. Currently, the classroom, and it has been for my entire lifetime and for generations before that, is the default for almost all forms of training other than using a book for something. And I think the answer is working out where does the classroom add value and where can we learn things in other ways. Mark's already talked about people learning stuff asynchronously. Well, that could be by going to a forum, answering questions, responding to them. It could also be by self-service of material. You download something and you read it. It doesn't have to be you download it. You can just read it in a magazine or a book. But we learn stuff all the time outside the classroom. Getting people together, whether it's online or face-to-face, is actually very costly. Costly in the real world because of all of the real-world logistics around it. Costly online because of people's time. And, by the way, that applies in the real world as well. However, it is worth getting people together, absolutely, for an online experience, something like a classroom, or indeed in the real world for it, particularly if you want people to discuss and engage with the material they've already taken into account offline. So perhaps they've discussed things asynchronously. Perhaps they've read stuff. Perhaps they've tried a simulation of something, and they come together to then discuss it. And also the other reason for getting, the other key reason I think for getting people together online into a quasi classroom state is to check their understanding. They may believe they've done something and have got it wrong. So for those reasons, it's a great way to get people together, and also, of course, to practice things sometimes. Sometimes the best way you can practice things is with other people and discuss it. I'm actually going through a Spanish course online at the moment. We do all our learning offline, and when we come together, we practice speaking Spanish. So there are lots of things that we do and can do which are not like the classroom. And look, I have no financial reason for suggesting Learning Pool, but I have to tell you, Learning Pool does do a very good job of providing a platform that enables this and enables people to get to other forms of learning experience. But it's not just Learning Pool. There are lots of other ways of doing this. So look, Louise, I appreciate you. You may have come to this thinking that's the question I want to answer, and I apologize if that's not a deep enough answer to you. I hope that's at least an idea. And Patricia, you said it's a good question. It is a good question. It may be that there is more that we could discuss with that. Listen, I always say it's the end of a presentation, but hopefully the beginning of a conversation. I am Donald H. Taylor on everything, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, everywhere else. If you want to get in touch with me, just ping me a question. I know lots of people. I probably don't know the answer myself, but I know lots of people, and I can put you in touch with it. We're all going through a tough time right now in learning and development. We really are. But on the other hand, there's tremendous opportunity. So let's support each other. Let me support you if I can in getting the best out of yourselves and making the most of this opportunity so that we can be in that strategic place in the future. Look, I can see everybody saying thank you. That's like a polite way of saying, Don, you can shut up now. But look, thank you, everybody in the room, for coming in, sharing your thoughts and observations. Thanks, Skip. He's got webinar design examples. Look, Joe, if you want to put anything in there about what you're offering with online delivery as well, that's great. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn here. And I've written a book, Webinar Master, which is available for free, which you can download from my website as well. Mark, I've been doing a lot of talking. Your picture's there as well. Is there anything you want to say to everybody before we wrap up?
Yeah, it's just about, what do we do with the current moving classroom training across? It would be absolutely wonderful if we could, move all of your learning and all of the skills that you need to learn, away from a system and, into the flow of work. So all of that delivery and your LMS and your LFP just all becomes, totally invisible, and you get the information that you need delivered to you, pushed or nudged via all of the data you have in the background. So that would be a real wonderful experience for all of these people that struggle to get onto these systems or to figure out what they have to do next. It is just all delivered or nudged to you, or there's a campaign that runs in the background that gives you all of this information, and you just learn as you go, just where you work.
And you're saying it would be wonderful, and you can do it?
Yeah. So we have systems to do that. So based on the data, we can figure out what you're doing and what you need to learn next and where you need to go. So based upon statements that have gone into learning record stores, we can use our products to push data to you into your email stream or into your Microsoft Teams or your Slack channels or whatever it is. And just small snippets of information, whether it be microlearning or whatever it is. But it just sort of removes all of those barriers that people normally take with logging into a system and getting frustrated trying to find it.
Brilliant. Look, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I always, my watchword is try to be useful. Whatever else you do, if you're going to talk to people, try to be useful. And I really thank you, Patricia, Louise, and other people for saying this appears to be useful. Karen's using the word insightful. You'll get the recording, you'll get the chat, you'll get links in this coming to you from Learning Pool. So thank you so much. You never get time back, so I really appreciate you spending an hour together with me and Mark talking about these issues. Looking forward to staying in touch in the future and being part of our L&D community. So thank you everyone in the room for your contributions. And Mark, thank you for putting up with listening to me talking about this stuff for so much, and for your contributions invaluable about the world of data. Mark, thank you very much.
Thanks, Donald. It was a pleasure.